Just brush it off. Yours.
Okay, we're live now. This is Senate Transportation. We're talking about 868 T-bill, an amendment that Senator Harrison has, section 31, which was dealing with the approval for leases for existing leases, renewing existing leases for state-owned railroads. And so take it away, Senator Harrison.
Thank you very much. So Senator Wendy Harrison, Windham District, thank you very much for giving me this time. And this subject came up yesterday in the presentation of the bill. It was raised by Senator Sears regarding just generally the impact of railroads and railroad operations, how extensive those can be. He talked about storage of cars, and I have knowledge, we all have knowledge of safety at crossings. There's a lot of impacts that railroads have. And I understand that the ability of the state, the authority of the state doesn't extend to compelling the railroad to have specific terms or conditions in a lease, and that the federal Surface Transportation Board, the STB, that board has the authority when the state and the railroad cannot come to an agreement on extension of a lease, that board decides what the terms of the lease will be. But that board, I presume, this I haven't confirmed, would logically have take input from the state. And I think that the legislature should not delegate its authority automatically to VTrans in determining what issues are important to residents of the state. VTrans would likely be the carrier of our message, but I think the legislature represents the public, and the public needs access to any available mechanism to influence how railroad operations occur. So the amendment is very simple. What it does is it gets rid of the language that is stricken, which conditions the secretary's actions as being with the approval of the governor and the General Assembly, or if the General Assembly is not in session, a special committee. And then later on in the bill, if there is a lease, a short-term lease or operating agreement, there's currently a notification of a change in that lease or agreement. There's a notification to the House and Senate committees on transportation, and I think it's important. I think it's the purview and the responsibility of those committees to be aware of what's happening in the railroad land.
About this language, because normally, for example, when we're looking at the purchase of land, we had to go to JTOC. And this has to go to joint fiscal and the chairs. And it seems to me maybe the approval should be with the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, as opposed to joint fiscal and the chairs of the House and Senate. So we're creating a different special committee here that's different than JTOC. And that is probably existing language, but now that I'm looking at it, it seems like maybe that is the more appropriate committee, which is the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee. And that was the committee that met to deal with the, to authorize retroactively the purchase of the land for the Franklin County Airport. So it just seems to me if we're interested in doing that, maybe rather than creating another special committee, we should reference one that's already been created in statute.
Okay. That is the existing language, so if we're gonna
Change it, it seems like maybe that's the better committee. I would recommend that as well.
Any questions for Senator Harrison?
We kind of looked at it this way. We were not giving away anything we didn't have.
Right, but I think,
But on the other
you may
hand,
be giving away,
well, possibly, or the review, but, so we were kind of looking at the fact that we had a lot of federal preemption here, and, that might in fact preempt our ability to, on it, but, I would say if this is, something that we want to do, recognizing the extent that federal law permits, then we could view this as a friendly amendment, but I would recommend we, update that language. I have a feeling this is probably quite old and might even predate the creation of JTOC.
I do have one question. Why you added the, and to the extent permitted under federal law in your amendment, that's not an
right,
You want me to answer?
sure.
Jen Kirby, Madison Legislative Council. That was my suggestion. It's language we fairly frequently put in when we are aware that there is potential federal preemption or federal law that may conflict with state law, recognizing, sort of broadcasting both to the federal government that we're not looking to do anything that intrudes on their supremacy in the area, and also as kind of a notification to anyone reading it that this may not be entirely within the state's purview.
Okay.
I think for all those reasons, it's not uncommon that we do this.
Yeah, I just wondered. Okay, Senator Chin, any other question?
Okay.
Thank you, Senator. So you're able to get some information from the agency's point of view on that?
Thank you. For the record, Michelle Boomhauer, Vermont Agency of Transportation. So just to set some context, we have 4 railroad leases. They're all with Vermont Rail Systems, and they are for each of their 4 lines. The BTR line, which is Burlington to Bennington and Hoosick Junction, the CLP, which is Rutland to Whitehall, Green Mountain Railroad, which is North Walpole, New Hampshire to Rutland. And then there are 2 subdivisions of the Washington County Railroad, the Barre Montpelier and the White River Junction Newport. The leases we have on those lines, those 4 leases for those lines, with the Great Washington County Railroad being 1 lease, range from 30 to 50 years in duration. And just some background on the state's authority with regards to railroads and operations of railroads, including activities within lease language. When Congress enacted the Transportation Act in 1920, the Interstate Commerce Commission was succeeded in 1996 by the Surface Transportation Board, which has the regulatory authority over railroad construction, abandonments, discontinuance of service mergers, changes of control, trackage rights, and leases of railroads for continued operation. And this is all laid out within 49 USC section 11.323. This preemptive authority was reinforced basically by the Interstate Commerce Commission Termination Act of 1995, which broadly preempts state law remedies with respect to regulation of rail transportation. The Surface Transportation Board reviews proposed transactions requiring its approval, including proposed leases for conformance with federal transportation policy, as well as applicants' ability to perform its duties as federally licensed common carrier as a railroad. Any party seeking to abandon a rail line or discontinue rail service must first obtain appropriate authority from the STB, notwithstanding any lease or other contractual arrangements between the parties regarding the provision of rail service. So practically speaking, this means that an owner of a railroad property cannot use state landlord, tenant, or contract law to force an incumbent railroad tenant or trackage rights users to discontinue rail services or restrict its operations. If an existing lease or trackage rights agreements expires, as in a lease lapses, and the parties are unable to agree on the terms of a new lease or trackage rights agreement, Surface Transportation Board can impose a new agreement on the parties. And this has happened regularly in federal STB proceedings. So, I think that what we are dealing with here is a case whereby the realm of lease provisions is very limited to the provision of the actual service, the amount of revenues that will be either paid or subsidized to the railroad, depending on the status of their activities. For instance, with the Washington County Railroad out here, that railroad has operated on a subsidized basis by the state in order to build up the railroad's economic activity. And that economic activity has now reached a point that in this lease renewal, we will be sort of swapping things around so that the railroad will be paying the state funding based on their movement of goods and services. And that's typically what happens on all the other railroad leases across the state. And that's how the state gains revenue. We also have fixed arrangements related to what infrastructure the state will take care of and which ones the railroad will take care of relative to bridges in particular. We have no rights as a state to direct anything outside of those provisions. So in other words, we can't tell the railroad where to park their cars, how to operate their railroads in terms of time of day of the week, year in and year out. We can't tell them what kinds of goods and services they can provide on their railroad. And so any sort of lease provisions that we would engage with are very strictly limited under the Surface Transportation Board. And if as a state we were to try to negotiate a lease that strayed outside of that strict parameter, then the railroad would quickly exert their authority and take the matter to the Surface Transportation Board, where unless they were operating outside of the safety provisions that the federal government requires for railroads, they would be within their rights and granted a lease as prescribed by the Surface Transportation Board. We, as a state, on the other hand, would have to hire a DC attorney who would appear before the Surface Transportation Board, because not just anybody can go and represent the state before the STB, and we would have to try and present a case as to why we felt that we were within our rights to request any particular lease elements to be modified. So within that construct, that was the purpose of bringing the language to you that we brought to you, which replaces very outdated language, which arose in all likelihood around the time that the state was acquiring railroads and initially entering into leases, and also pre-Surface Transportation Board function. So whether it's a body of, the Joint Transportation Oversight Committee, the governor, the secretary, I think we would all be in the same boat in terms of trying to manage overcoming something that's outside of the purview of the state with regards to the lease renewal. They're entitled to a lease renewal unless they are outside of their safety provisions. If they were to stray outside of their safety provisions, or if they had stopped operating and we wanted to try and assign a lease to another railroad operator, then it would be within our rights to go to the Surface Transportation Board and seek to have their lease discontinued. The other thing that I wanted to point out was that, this is a two-way street. Under FHWA regulations, VTrans needs a railroad agreement in place in order for any federal highway aid projects that affect rail facilities, so like railroad crossings. So at any given time, there are several federal aid highway projects in the pipeline that affect Vermont rail system facilities that we may be undertaking. It could be bridge overpasses and that sort of thing. So, if we do not find ourselves in a positive relationship with the railroad, you know, they certainly could delay us advancing highway projects for which they would be impacted under this, under general conditions. I think our point was, in order to keep this as streamlined and as possible, given the very limited purview we have over this, engaging the General Assembly in lease negotiations was, even if it were a committee of the General Assembly, may not be the most efficient way for the agency to operate when it comes to railroads.
Okay.
Senator,
Two questions. So one, the 30 to 50 years really reminded me. So do we have the right to negotiate shorter terms, or is there shorter extensions, or every time they renew, is it always going to be within 30 to 50 years?
What we generally have is those longer term leases with 10-year renewals. And that's the time where we're checking to see, like, how are the revenues doing? And, you know, are there any other sort of things that we would typically negotiate with them on that we want to modify within the lease renewal. So that's how that would work.
And you said, would any jeopardy to a lease with, if this gets caught up in some sort of legislative political process where the lease is, because of this language as is, that you're saying just that jeopardy, those questions could affect federal funding for projects and monies going to railroad passes? So
what I'm saying is that if the railroad found themselves in a position of us holding up a lease process, and then potentially having to go to the Surface Transportation Board at their expense to get that resolved, these other efforts we have underway over here with them may suffer from
the collateral impact.
It's a collateral impact, essentially. It's a great way to put it, because they are not compelled to sign these these agreements, because it's to our benefit, you know, on roadway projects where we have to receive an agreement with the railroad to get those agreements so we can move our federal aid highway projects forward. I think railroad crossing is not a good example because typically those are mutually beneficial, but there are other types of projects where the railroad could continue to operate fine without the highway project moving forward.
Senator Flynn, you had something?
Yes,
Secretary Flynn.
thank you for that. Joe Flynn, for the record,
You would be a
Secretary.
fake, I thought.
I just kind of follow on Senator Chitten's question, if I followed it correctly. Another point that I would make is that if there's any question whatsoever as to the sustainability of railroad operations and the predictability of these leases renewing, which impact ongoing railroad operations, we in fact would be in jeopardy when it comes to grant money and earmark money, both of which this state has benefited dramatically over the decades. By that, just look at what has been received to get the Ethan Allen into Burlington, but as importantly, you recall in some of our testimony going back, I think now 3 years, $20 million in Chrissy grants, I think that was the acronym at the time, to upgrade the bridges from Rutland to Bennington to Hoosick, New York, and then an earmark, I believe it was from Senator Welch, and I don't want to misspeak if it was Senator Sanders, to add money to that because what inflation did to that project. If there is even the hint that we are going to get tied up in knots about whether or not there'll even be a lease to operate the railroad, funders will look elsewhere.
Senator Eagle.
And I'd be nervous about that. I mean, we all know that airports and railroads in this state are profitable as a whole for what we have to put into them, and we count on that money. And I'm proud of what Vermont has done, both with airports, which we aren't talking about, but with railroads especially, because I think that with what we have going through our state, where other states are probably, like New Hampshire, probably aren't as pushing us hard as we are, and our direct routes between Montreal and the seaports that we have, I think it's very, very important that we keep those lines competitive and open and viable.
So what you haven't said is you've looked at this language.
I looked at that language and I feel the language that was put into the T-bill is the appropriate language to go forward with. I feel this language adds a cloud to, the process that could arise. And, you know, I think the agency could probably, you know, depending on the nature of the situation, could rely upon the federal preemption related to what elements of the leases we have control over to determine, you know, whether or not the matter is going to need to come before JTAC. But I just feel like it confuses things and adds another layer of bureaucracy that, since we have basically little to no control over the matter, I'm not sure that it helps anything.
Senator Schumer?
So what I heard Senator Harrison say is that getting rid of this would eliminate some of our advocacy around other aspects besides what I heard you say. We just cannot discontinue or restrict trackage rights, but we do have, as a legislature and as an overseeing body, the owner of these rails, the rights to press on other factors. No, nothing at all.
Nothing at all.
Like
Nothing at all. So, and that has been brought up time and again. I think Senator Sears is examples of the storage of the propane tanker trucks. We have no say or control over that. And
Full stop.
full stop. Full
Same
stop.
with like spraying of pesticides along the trash.
Yeah.
catch
Would have been a
residence.
challenge.
Or Act 250, I mean,
Yeah.
because
Act
they've got
250,
any kind of
full stop.
local zoning, because they go through so many municipalities, all
Yeah,
of that's
it's
preempted.
interstate commerce. It's
Okay.
preempted.
Senator Harrison, then we're gonna move
Yeah,
on
just a
to
couple
town
questions. So
permit.
maintenance, but, and the price, we have a say in that, right?
Yeah, we have a say in that.
Okay.
And they're required to maintain according to federal rail safety standards and as, you know, with regards to their operational requirements under the STB.
When is the next lease up?
So the lease that brought this matter forward is up at the end of June.
For this little
Okay.
Montpelier
Yeah.
area track.
Okay. So,
Oh,
so that's pretty quick, but, I mean, just one other point is that since these are such long-term leases, that makes me think that the legislature should be at least alerted to them, even, that is even more important than the legislature.
We could certainly, I think, alerting the legislature to the lease schedules and the renewal schedules would be something we would be amenable to. That seems completely
Maybe as
reasonable.
part of our presentations too.
Yeah, we could do it on an annual basis as we make our presentations.
Senator,
So negotiations are allowed as far as who's going to repair or who's gonna do the infrastructure repairs. If I remember correctly, the people that have had this lease on this line out here have done the vast majority of repairs
the other
on
way
that.
around.
No, on this one, it's the other way around.
Okay,
Oh, we're
And-
switching it in the next place.
okay.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of, we not only made repairs, but we also paid them to operate the railroad,
Okay.
subsidy. Now that they are operating, so they won't be operating at a loss, in order to, you know, it was a benefit to the state to have them be able to go over there and get the rock out of the mountain and for all of our flood recovery, et cetera. But now that they have a situation where they're making money off of this with this client and this resource, then now they will start paying us like they do on other lines for their operations.
Okay. I don't know if we have any other discussion on the amendment, or if we want to move on to our next issue, think about it, or,
Because the language we have didn't have anything to do with joint fiscal chairs, all that, the replacement language.
No, it gave the authority to the secretary
Yeah.
to negotiate the leases.
yeah, so joint fiscal committee was the stuff that was struck out, but that is all.
Oh, yeah, okay. And this is,
Yes,
We
Senator.
are passing over third reading today, just to give another date that both these areas, Berlin and this other thing over. But I don't know, what do you think?
Okay, yeah, that's something to consider.
I guess one of the other options is the extent to which, when you're renegotiating a lease or, if it's a scheduled one, that could be part of the transportation, T-bill presentation.
Yes, absolutely.
Or if it's one with, doesn't sound like,
There's like, we don't do that with any of their other leases, but I guess if these.
And I think that was also part of the reason for bringing this
no,
forward.
I know we don't do it
Yeah.
now. So,
You know, we
and
have,
in this case, with the federal preemption, limits very much what we could even influence at all, except hold it up, I suppose.
Yes.
It may just say one other quick thing. We work with lease renewals all the time. We're renewing different airport vendors all the time.
Yeah.
So one might ask then, where does that stop?
Yeah, no, that's my point.
Do you check with us when you renew?
No, absolutely not. It's been our book of business forever. I mean,
We don't want to be involved in everything.
you wouldn't want to be involved in, how would we run our business if we had to, with all due respect?
No, exactly, no, you guys are we put you in a good position to
Any more than
run that.
DGS leases, right?
Absolutely.
I mean, it's all over the
Yeah,
place.
well, I wouldn't want that in front of my committee every time.
Okay, last word.
I would appreciate the extra day because these leases have, the revenue's tremendous. I'm sure we're talking about lots of money here and there's only 4 of them.
No,
No, there's not.
I wish it were the case.
Well, maybe we could help.
Well,
no.
the risk here is.
I think that we've heard that we can.
Okay, well, also, there's just not a lot of there's railroad companies that,
The dollar amount is
yeah,
something that we do have authority over.
No, I mean.
we could put pressure, but that's the same with all the leases. We could argue about
I think
it, but
whatever
right-
we put, well, I'm sorry, I apologize.
just that we don't want to get involved, I don't think, as a legislature transportation committee in the operation of leases. And these, what Mike, Michelle said, we were paying them to run it because it was a defunct, it wasn't running at all. Nobody was beating our door down, put it on RFP, nobody responded other than we said, we'll pay you to run it. So it's not like there's a way that our oversight will, I think, change this.
And I think what I've heard is that we can push, but they can push harder. And a lot harder. And, that's what bothers me or scares me, actually.
But let's do that. We'll move on to our next agenda item and we'll talk.
Okay,
We'll
thank you.
postpone it.
Appreciate it. Yeah.
Okay, so you can let in John Berlin. And this will also help because Senator Watson has an amendment that she wants to talk about, so what's that? No, we're not gonna do that. Senator Berlin. Is Mr. Nelson there?
Good morning.
Morning. Welcome to the Senate Transportation Committee. We'll go do a quick round of introductions, then you can introduce yourself and let us know what your concerns are with the central garage.
Senator Russ Singles, Essex District, thank you for coming.
I'm Andrew Perzik from the Washington District.
Jane Kitchell from St. Johnsbury, from a Caledonia district.
Tom Chittenden from Chittenden Southeast.
And welcome, and we invited you to come tell us what the town of Berlin's view is of the potential central garage in your town.
Morning. I appreciate the opportunity to meet with you today. For the record, I am Ture Nelson, Ture Nelson, Nelson. I'm a select board member and the town administrator for the town of Berlin. I do realize we're very late in the process on this bill, and I believe it's scheduled for third reading today or tomorrow. So I do apologize for bringing this issue up at the very last minute. But I do appreciate Senator Perchlik being very amenable to our concerns. What I'm speaking about today is Section 30 of the bill concerning the purchase of land for the new central garage location that was severely devastated in the July floods. This proposed location on Payne Turnpike North is in our town center zoning district, which, some of the purposes of that district include establishing a well-defined mixed-use compact and walkable center, promoting site designs that feature reduced parking footprints, landscaping, and green infrastructure, and allowing for higher density housing in areas that can be served by public infrastructure and transit. To that end, the town has invested over $12 million in water, wastewater, and land use regulations for this area to better accommodate housing, which we all agree is of critical need in Vermont. And this is prime location in Berlin, for housing. We had reached out to V-Trans, right after the flood. We had some other property in town, specifically 7 acres off of Kuwas Trail, which is just off of Airport Road, at the end of the airport, potentially looking at a joint use there between the town and the state, to accommodate both our needs, especially for the central garage. That would be very advantageous to V-Trans, as it's very close to the airport and the existing Dill building, which houses a lot of the large functions of V-Trans. The new town center district was awarded to Berlin in 2022. It is the 3rd designation in the 25-year history of this designation, and the first one outside of Chittenden County. Also, this area is what's called I believe I'm getting this right, a neighborhood development center, which again was, identified for increased housing and fewer Act 250 and so forth requirements for housing. Might also have a concern about the size of the parcel. 23 acres is significantly larger than the current footprint on Barry Montpelier Road, which is just about a little over 8 acres. So, tripling the size of that footprint, especially in an area where we're trying to reduce parking footprints. And we've all seen the central garage on the Barry Montpelier Road. That is almost entirely asphalt and buildings. Doesn't provide for really any green space. So, we just ask for anything that can be done to, appreciate listening to our concerns, and anything we can do to find a better a location for this project for all concerned.
Well, thank you, Mr. Nelson, and we have the secretary here today, so you can stay on and hear his response. I know he has to go to a press conference, so you're good. Okay, so we have a question.
Oh, I do. In light of what you're talking about, development of a town center and so forth, would the garage the sale of the land for this purpose not be consistent? Would it be not in violation? Would it need some kind of a variance because of how you would envision the use of this acreage? In other words, is this not a permissible use under your design and zoning requirements?
Under our zoning requirements, it's pretty broad as far as what we call government services. So likely it would fall under that. The problem we have found is that the state is, pretty much feels they are exempt from any type of zoning conditions put on. I was a member of the Development Review Board when the state police barracks applied, and we wanted, part of our zoning requirements required a sidewalk be placed in front of the barracks to promote walkability, which is, a huge concern of your committee. A lot of time and efforts goes in, rightfully so, for walkable and pedestrian facilities. And we were told straight up by, Buildings General Services that they were not subject to these requirements. So we're afraid that, the same thing would happen here, that would have another large section of property that would not, just something as simple as sidewalks would be equipped with.
Okay, Senator Ingles.
Thank you, Mr. Nelson. As far as the broad aspect of the 23 acres being all used, I don't think it's all buildable, is it? I mean, I think it's a 23-acre parcel that probably you can, because there are some wetlands there and stuff, so you wouldn't probably see a site that was all developed there. Would you, as far as if V-Trans wanted to use it?
I'm not wetlands expert by any means, but I have seen other comments, from V-Trans that they're not looking to be the only resident on this area. They would be open to other state agencies moving in as well. So I think, the actual amount of land that's buildable, I don't know. I've not seen anything on any of the A&R atlases or anything that shows a significant portion of land not being buildable. There is the stream that runs through the extreme corner of it. But in my limited knowledge, have not seen anything that would preclude building on that. And like I said, I've seen emails where, that they've talked about allowing other agencies in on that property as well.
And it's just a hard stop for Berlin. You really don't care to have that facility there. It's something that you probably you just don't want there. Is that true?
I would classify it as a hard stop. We'd love to have V-Trans here in Berlin. We'd love to have the Central Garage here in Berlin, and would like to, further explore other opportunities with them. Maybe a better location for the Central Garage. And like I said, we have reached out to them before about Kuas Trail, moving something in there. So we are very much welcoming to V-Trans, staying here in Berlin. We just think we can find a better tract of land for this project.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Nelson. Any other questions? The town, okay with that? We'll have the secretary.
Good morning, and thank you. For the record, Joe Flynn, Secretary of the Agency of Transportation. Appreciate the opportunity to be here today. This really sort of surprised us. As Mr. Nelson said, we had spoken to actually Tom Badowski, who is the Assistant Town Administrator. So I think if there's any concern that this project or the intention of this project was somehow a surprise to Berlin, that shouldn't have been the case, and that's clearly not what Mr. Nelson said. I just wanted to make that point. There was a conversation about the Kuas Trail. I've been down the trail 3 times. One time last summer, there was water over the bottom of it. It looks like a stump dump down there. I'm not sure exactly what the town uses it for. It's a dirt road currently. There's no sewer or water down that road that I'm aware of at this point, and it's quite a steep incline. It's certainly not insurmountable by any means, but I would consider it pretty highly undeveloped. And we just immediately saw this as a very expensive ordeal. And after, I think I testified before, after looking at a total of 11 parcels of property, one of which we actually counted, this one, landed on the Pan Turnpike. But a couple things I'd like to point out. As you saw, I passed out Berlin's land use regulations, which were revised in June of 2022. And of course, it does talk about housing and congregate housing. It also talks about approved things for the town zoning district as hotels, motels, lawn and garden centers, transit facilities. I believe the town had been in conversation with Green Mountain Transit about building a bus barn on this property on Payne Turnpike. And as Mr. Nelson said, government facility, office buildings. I've been told that there's, none of this of course has come to fruition, but medical office building with up to 300 parking spaces, a plumbing supply company interested in building a warehouse. So again, we clearly didn't feel that we were acting in any egregious fashion with respect to what we pictured as a modern fleet maintenance facility. I would like to say, and I appreciate this opportunity to say this, that we're not picturing this as an active construction site. We're not picturing this as a site where we have rows of Jersey barriers stacked up or corrugated culverts stored, sand piles or salt sheds. This would be like a car dealership, of which there are many, within a quarter mile of that area. So again, I just appreciate the chance to talk. And I also, Mr. Nelson, want to say that I hope in no way the agency seemed put offish that it didn't officially come to the select board. We didn't feel that was the right cadence. We thought the right cadence was to come before the legislature to get the permission to spend the money that we have
And then once we knew we had that authority to spend the money, have a formal conversation with the town of Berlin, although there had been some informal conversations, as both you and I have noted. Also to the point about acreage size, I think you mentioned, Senator Ingalls, we've worked with DEC, well, actually, the landowner has worked with DEC and Grenier Engineering. And although there are 23 acres, actually, when I testified before you before, I thought it was 20, so it is 23. There does seem to be about 8 to 9 that is inarguably buildable. That might somehow expand slightly, but we're not picturing 23 acres of asphalt and impervious surface. I don't want to get out over my skis here, but if the issue is a sidewalk, we haven't even had the opportunity to talk about that with Berlin. I imagine we are the transportation agency. We are about bike and ped projects. We are about mobility. I'm not sure. We are not BGS as well, and I don't know the constraints they were under when they were trying to finance the Berlin Barrack. So I would say that a conversation about a sidewalk along Payne Turnpike would certainly not be off the table. And also, sincere dialogue with the town about amenities, accoutrements, and how it might see, if at all, a garage facility like this being something that it could embrace. But at the end of the day, if the town of Berlin has a housing project they'd like to launch and they want to buy the property, we will bow out and we will celebrate a housing project. We do not want to go someplace where it doesn't feel like we're wanted to be there. And housing is the #1 priority. We agree with that.
Senator Chin.
I feel like we've become the Berlin DRB, Development Review Board. But my question is more, we are in this language authorizing you to attempt to purchase the land. My question might be for the Edge Council, which I don't see in the room, but if the state has the authorization to buy this land, can you supersede and override and step all over local zoning? Or will you still have to go through their processes to actually build this?
No, my understanding is by statute of the legislature, we are not authorized to go through local zoning.
To go through local zoning. So once you're authorized to do this, you just get to do it.
Correct. But that's the rules that have been set up for us by the body that
This is the way we are the Development Review Board for
Right.
Berlin right now.
Or for anywhere, I mean, like,
Right.
we dealt with this with the new project in Franklin, where you talked about
Right.
the changing the water line.
And we dealt with it in Grand Isle County when they sued us, the town of Grand Isle, because we didn't get a zoning permit to put our office trailers on our own property, by the way, to build the drawbridge. And spend taxpayer money suing us and
But what I do hear you saying,
statute upheld.
Secretary, that your plan would be to work with the town on a plan for the site that is mutually agreeable. You would just start building, you would work with them and say, how can we make this, if this land works for you guys, you would want to meet with the town and say, how can we make this beneficial to the town?
Absolutely. I mean, we never thought we were gonna build this without talking with the town. It's just, I think it's a sequence thing. We had these informal conversations, as Mr. Nelson mentioned, with Tom Badowski, but we did not think that that was the right choice for us. It seems to be not the type of a location that would be really ideal, but we would not build, very much like you mentioned, Swanton, Senator Perch, like, in talking with the town and the Northwest Regional Planning Commission, one of the big rubs up there was that intersection that currently exists. And so we said, okay, we'll come back a ways and we'll build a new entrance road onto the property. And that was because of input from the town. And then we said, by the way, we'll do a study of that intersection for a future project to improve it nonetheless. So that was because of input from the town. But we just hadn't gotten to that stage yet. We really felt that the right cadence was to have the authorization to spend money to buy land and then talk with the municipality in which the land is in that we wish to buy.
I have a question. So the town is saying that we want to host it but not necessarily there. The way we wrote it is pretty prescriptive. If in the conversations with the town, then maybe there's a reason why this other site isn't available. I'm just wondering whether our language limits the kinds of discussions. And maybe we should look at that language to give you more flexibility, because because we've kind of locked you in relative to how it's written. So I just bring that up as maybe something we need to look at.
Right.
If I might respond, I think that's spot on, Senator Kitchell. If the language at the end of the day,
Is to authorize purchase of
Where do-
land and not, X number of acres, blah, blah, blah.
and necessarily speak to a municipality, but authorize the agency to spend up to $2 million. And then from that same account, I believe the language speaks to, and then design and engineering money from that account, not within the 2 million. And then just let us go forth. We can engage with Berlin. If that doesn't seem to be the right property or where we're wanted, then at least it allows us to look for something else, and perhaps not in Berlin, but wherever it might be that is in this area. I've said in this testimony before that we want to stay in this area. We want to keep the jobs in this area. And Central Garage is named that for a reason, and we want to keep its location sort of central in the state of Vermont. So we would commit to remaining in the general area of this part of Vermont. But it's, and I know you know this, but it's really incumbent upon us to have some flexibility and move forward so that we can get out of the floodplain we're in and get on with building a facility to appropriately take care of the equipment that is paid for by the taxpayers and relied on every day. So I think amending the language might serve everyone's interest.
Yeah, we have a proposal from Senator Watson to maybe do that, and so if we spend another day, we can also just do that from the committee. And what I think we should do is similar to what we did when you came in to get permission to sell the Caledonia Airport, where we had the town in and made sure that the town felt like the process was going well. So I don't know how we would do that in the language, but I thought we made sure the town was okay with it before we okayed it. That they were okay with it from the beginning, so that was an easier.
Yeah, and also was the sale of a publicly owned
Right.
asset, and this
Right.
is somewhat
Right.
different.
I mean, on the side of it was already developed, it was already there.
But we made an effort to make sure the town was okay with it before we.
I mean, I can say to you that if we were given the money to procure property, I would commit to saying to you that we would not enter into a purchase and sale agreement and conclude it with a transaction to buy the property without having engaged with the town before that.
And I think my guess is that once you do engage with the town and you show them your plans, and there can be a discussion about what the site looks like and what else is there, what other amenities, bus stops, bike paths, sidewalks. There's the response might be different. Because I think when you drive by the current Central Garage, you don't say, oh, that's something that I want on my road, because it doesn't look that good, especially these days.
Right.
So maybe there's an opportunity there to make
Well,
something that the town.
That's right. And this property actually allows for that garage to be on the lower piece, as you know. I just want to clarify my former comment though about engaging with the town if we were to go someplace else. Caveat to that, there would have to be whatever the time constraints are on the availability of the property. In other words,
Yeah, because you're flooded out.
right, but if a different parcel is on the market and if we didn't move fast, we wouldn't get it. We still would make every effort to let the town know what our plans are, but I want to be careful that I didn't just trip myself up and say every issue would be addressed with the town before we would conclude a purchase and sale agreement, because that may just end up hamstringing us to accomplishing anything. And I think I've told you this before, but since July, I myself and some other people have had to remove all of the vehicles from Central Garage where it is today in December to get them up to Dill and Knapp, so they didn't get flooded out in December when the Stevens branch came up. So, I mean, this isn't meant to be the sky is falling here, but it is a real situation. We're still currently vulnerable in the floodplain we're in. And our mechanics are devoted employees, but they're working in conditions which are much, much less than what was there before, let alone what perhaps would be adequate going forward. So we just really want to move forward.
Yeah, appreciate that. Thank you, Secretary.
Thank you.
Mr. Nelson, did you have any other reply comments to that you would want to offer at this time?
No, Senator, just, I welcome the opportunity to work with Secretary Flynn and see if we can find a good location for them.
Okay, and just so you know, Mr. Nelson, that you have your two representatives in the room here today, Representative Donahue and Gosselin are here paying attention.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary. Okay,
Sounds like this land could be sold to anybody, it could be for a variety of.
For a variety of reasons.
That would not be housing,
Right.
what you're talking
I
about.
guess I was just curious and it didn't really matter to the discussion, so I didn't ask it, but it was like, has there been any interest in housing? It sounds like there's been interest in everything else, but.
I'm not sure,
I
yeah.
don't know, it's been on the market for a while.
Well, we can investigate that. I think we have to prepare for our budget. Michelle has a comment?
Senator, did you want to hear about the e-bike incentive status?
Is this what you're gonna
That's
tell us?
what I was gonna tell you, that there's about $1,000 left and that there's $1.84 million in the EPA grant application.
1.4.
I thought that there was.
1.84.
1.8.
I thought there was.
And
I
now
almost said that yesterday.
that-
That almost 2 million
Announcements
elsewhere.
are expected in July, awards in October, contracting to sort of set up moving the funds from ANR to AOT to our contractor. It'd probably be the first of the calendar year before we're ready to start
1
issuing incentives if that's was funded, 1.84.
That's the thing, yeah. the big
Okay,
grants.
that's helpful. If I could take this, this might have been your. Okay,
George now.
great. I will, when we talk about it on the floor, we'll do that. So I know we have to prepare for the budget presentation.
Me too.
We're gonna pass over.
So I think I'm gonna suggest that we pass over for third reading today so we can talk about this language as well as the railroad language.
We have
One more day of time.
caucus of the whole at 12:15.
Yeah.
Oh,
You're leading it.
Yeah.
On what?
You have.
Leading it. Yeah, you have it.